Okay, so get this. By 2025, we're looking at something like 1.6 trillion prostrations during Ramadan prayers.
Trillion.
Yeah, trillion with a T. That's a
Yeah.
pretty hard number to actually visualize.
Yeah, definitely puts things into perspective, doesn't it?
For sure. I mean, we're talking about Ramadan here, right? A month that's massively important for Muslims all over the world. But this kind of devotion, this scale, it's just kind of mind-blowing.
It really is.
So that's what we're going to be getting into today. How is spiritual commitment evolving, especially during Ramadan?
Exactly. We've been looking at some super interesting data from CrescentRating to try and understand this better.
Oh, cool.
So we've got their Ramadan 2025 article.
Yeah.
It compares survey data from 2022, 2024, and even projections for 2025.
Wow. So we're going all the way to 2025. Cool.
Yep. And on top of that, we've also got their overall Ramadan stats for 2025.
Nice. So what are we hoping to find out?
Well, a lot of things, actually. Like, how are Muslims observing Ramadan these days? What are their top priorities? And what can these changes tell us about, like, their spiritual lives and how they connect with their community, especially during this really important month?
Right. So let's start with the essentials. You know, the daily salah, the 5 daily prayers. Like, what does that look like in 2025?
Well, based on the survey, it seems that an impressive 91% of people still say that staying consistent with their salah is their main focus.
91%. That's huge.
It is. And it really shows how incredibly important these prayers are, you know.
Yeah,
They're like the bedrock of Muslim life.
totally. And especially during Ramadan when everyone's trying to be extra devout.
Absolutely. And what's even more fascinating is that this number's been pretty consistent.
Mhm.
Even as other things change, you know, the commitment to the 5 daily prayers just stays strong.
That's really interesting. Okay, so what about connecting with the Qur'an? Any changes there?
Definitely. There's a really noticeable jump in how many Muslims are excited about reciting the Quran during Ramadan. Like, projections for 2025 are at a whopping 87%.
Wow, 87%.
Yeah, and just a few years back, in 2022, it was only 57%. That's a pretty big difference.
That is big. So what's behind that sudden increase, do you think?
Well, there are a few possibilities.
Yeah.
It could be that it's just gotten way easier for people to access the Quran,
Yeah.
you know, with all the apps and websites and stuff.
Right. Makes sense.
And maybe, like, in a world that's changing so fast, people are looking for something to ground them, something spiritual. And the Quran, of course, offers that in spades.
Yeah, I could see that.
I mean, just think about this. CrescentRating estimates that 154 million people will be aiming to read the entire Quran during Ramadan in 2025. That's a lot of people.
That's amazing. Okay, so it's not just about individual reflection then, right? We're also talking about a shared experience. What about like the Taraweeh prayers?
Oh, yeah, those special prayers during Ramadan. Well, the numbers there are also climbing. In 2025, it's predicted that 76% of Muslims will be participating.
76%, that's up from what, 51% in 2022?
Exactly. So, you know, more and more people are seeking out that communal experience. Praying together at the mosque, the shared focus, it just creates a really special atmosphere.
It's about that sense of community then, right?
Right. So, yeah, especially after, you know, recent times when a lot of people felt isolated, there's maybe a stronger desire now to connect with others spiritually and to experience that collective energy.
And that's 541 million people expected at the masjid for these prayers, right?
Yeah, that's what they're projecting, which just goes to show the impact this can have on communities.
Absolutely. Now, Ramadan isn't just about prayer though, is it? What about giving back? Like with sadaqah, the voluntary charity.
Right. Well, that's also on the rise.
Yeah.
In 2025, it's predicted that 61% will emphasize giving sadaqah, up from 58% in 2024.
So it's becoming even more important for people to support those in need then? What do you think is driving that?
It's hard to say for sure, but maybe there's just a greater awareness of social responsibility these days. You know, Ramadan really stresses empathy and compassion. So maybe that naturally leads to more people wanting to help others.
It makes sense.
Plus, it's just gotten so much easier to donate online, and there's so much more visibility for different charities and causes.
That makes sense. So what about zakat, the obligatory charitable giving? What's the trend there?
So there was a bit of a dip in 2024, but it seems to be bouncing back a bit. Projections for 2025 put the emphasis on zakat distribution at around 23%.
So a slight recovery then. Interesting. Why do you think that is?
Well, maybe it has something to do with access. Like, there are all these new digital platforms now that make it easier for people to fulfill their zakat obligations. And there might also be more awareness campaigns about the importance of zakat and how to do it properly.
Makes sense. It's really fascinating to see how all these different aspects of worship are evolving. Some things are going up, some things are going down, Some are staying steady.
It is, yeah.
Okay, so let's talk about the stuff that's not, strictly required, like the voluntary worship. What about sunnah prayers?
Those extra prayers, you mean? Well, those are making a comeback. After dipping a bit, they're back up to 24% in 2025, same as in 2022.
Interesting. So what does that say about how people are approaching their faith?
It could be that people are really looking to connect with God on a deeper, more personal level. The Sunnah prayers offer that opportunity. It's about going above and beyond, making that extra effort.
Right. And what about trying to read the entire Qur'an at least once during Ramadan? Is that still a big goal for people?
It seems so, yeah.
Yeah.
Even though everyone's busy, there's still that desire to, fully immerse oneself in the Qur'an during the special time. It's about that connection, that spiritual growth. Projections are at 23% for 2025. So, yeah, it's definitely still a thing.
That's cool. And we talked about community earlier. What about those mosque iftars, those communal meals to break the fast?
Oh, yeah, those. Well, get this. They're expected to jump up to 17% in 2025. That's way up from just 11% in 2024.
Wow, that is a big jump. So what's behind that? More and more people wanting to share that experience.
It seems like it, yeah. I think it speaks to that deep need for connection, for sharing something meaningful with others. And it's not just about the food, right? It's about the whole experience, breaking fast together, the feeling of gratitude, that sense of togetherness. There's a really special energy there.
I can only imagine.
And maybe, after all the stuff that's happened in recent years, people are just craving that kind of connection even more.
Makes sense. Okay, so we've talked about a lot of different things here. Daily prayers, the Qur'an, charity, extra prayers, communal meals. So when we step back and look at it all, what are some of the big takeaways? What are the big trends, from year to year?
Well, one thing that really stands out is how important the basics are. Like the daily prayers and engaging with the Qur'an. Those are the things that Muslims consistently prioritize year after year during Ramadan.
Right, the core stuff.
Exactly. And it's also clear that Ramadan is this incredible time for communities to come together. More people are participating in Taraweeh prayers. More people are going to those mosque iftars. It shows how important these shared experiences are, for strengthening those bonds.
It's like a time for everyone to recharge, both individually and as a community.
Yeah, exactly. It's about strengthening those spiritual and social connections.
And we also talked about the increase in charitable giving, which is great to see. It shows that social responsibility is becoming more and more important.
Absolutely. And with all the new platforms for giving, it's just gotten so much easier to contribute to different causes.
And then there's that renewed focus on the voluntary stuff, more sunnah prayers, more people trying to finish the whole Qur'an. That's people are looking for a deeper spiritual experience.
Yeah, it's about going that extra mile and finding that personal space for reflection and growth.
And all this is happening while everyone's trying to juggle their daily lives, right?
Right. But it's about finding that balance, making sure that faith stays central, even when life gets busy.
Okay, so before we wrap up, can we go back to those big numbers you mentioned earlier, just to really drive home the sheer scale of Ramadan in 2025? It's one thing to talk about trends, but those numbers really paint a picture.
Sure. So in 2025, we're looking at a global Muslim population of over 2.16 billion, and about 1.5 billion of those will be observing the fast.
That's a lot of people.
It is. And if we're talking scale, we're estimating around 1.6 trillion prostrations during prayers. And the phrase Allahu Akbar, that's likely to be said somewhere between 2 and 4 trillion times. And there will probably be over 812 billion salutations sent to the Prophet Muhammad.
Those are some massive numbers.
They are. And remember, about 154 million people are expected to read the entire Qur'an. And over 541 million will likely visit mosques for prayers.
That's just amazing.
And then there's the food. We're talking about roughly 111 billion dates being eaten to break the fast.
111 billion dates. Okay, now that's a number I can actually wrap my head around, kind of.
It definitely gives you a sense of just how big Ramadan really is.
It does. It's a global phenomenon.
Wow. Okay, so before we go, let's do a quick recap. We've seen that spiritual commitment during Ramadan is deepening, and communities are growing stronger. The core practices, like praying and reading the Qur'an, are still super important. But we're also seeing more charitable giving and a bigger emphasis on community events, like those mosque iftars. It's really cool to see how Ramadan is evolving.
Yeah, it's like this snapshot of faith in action. It's adapting to modern life, but it's still deeply rooted in those core values of devotion and community.
It's been a really eye-opening deep dive. Makes you think, It's like, what does all this say about the power of faith in today's world? And how will technology continue to shape how we practice our faith? It's definitely food for thought. Thanks for joining me for this deep dive.